As detailed by CNBC, among all nations globally, Vietnam is set to witness the steepest rise in wealth over the next 10 years. Why? Because behind the scenes, it's been strategically positioning to take over as the world's next manufacturing core after China. Major corporations are expanding production in Vietnam. Names like Apple, Intel, and Samsung are heavily investing. Now you might wonder, having the top projected growth in the next decade sounds great, but why does it matter? The reason this is so remarkable is that within just a single generation, Vietnam has leapt from extreme poverty to a solid middle-income economy. To grasp how dramatic this evolution truly is, you have to dive into its past, years of constant warfare, and how the tide eventually turned. In this episode, we uncover Vietnam's economic journey as a rising global dark horse. We'll see the struggles, the massive shift, and the hurdles that still remain. So what do you think of when you hear the word Vietnam? Younger folks may picture scenic spots in Southeast Asia and cheap travel, while older generations might recall wartime chaos, soldiers, jungles, bombings, refugees, a narrative shaped by Western outlets and films like Platoon or Full Metal Jacket. But in the mid-2020s, that image is fading fast. Today, Ho Chi Minh City pulses with bikes, food, energy. Hanoi's skyline gleams, tech zones thrive, and big brands are everywhere. Vietnam's youth lead startups, green projects, and more. Standards of living are way up. A local saying goes, "Gian nan de chi," meaning wisdom comes from struggle. That couldn't be more true for this story. In order to understand a country, we have to learn about its history. And in Vietnam's case, like many countries at the time, it was a colony under a European power. Vietnam was under French colonial rule for close to a century. Starting from the mid-1800s, the country was absorbed into the French Indochina Federation, a colonial grouping that included present-day Laos and Cambodia. During this time, French authorities exploited Vietnam's natural and human resources for their own profit. Locals endured harsh treatment, forced labor, and heavy taxation. But after decades of oppression, resistance was quietly brewing. A deep hunger for independence spread among the Vietnamese people. This growing desire sparked a revolutionary movement, one that would be led by Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a curious and complex figure. Though just 5 feet, 5 inches tall and not physically imposing, he was incredibly determined. After spending years abroad studying political theory and seeking support for Vietnam's independence, he returned as a committed nationalist. Interestingly, he admired French democratic ideals, yet saw French colonialism as a betrayal of those very values. While he preferred peaceful solutions, he was unafraid to crush opposition when necessary. Eventually, Ho Chi Minh would be seen as the father of modern Vietnam. He led the Viet Minh, a communist-inspired resistance dedicated to ending French control. Vietnam's people were ready to push back. Though there were efforts for a peaceful settlement with the French, talks fell apart. In 1946, a full-blown war erupted, the First Indochina War between Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh forces and the French military. The war was brutal, grinding on for years. France's grip on Vietnam had already weakened after World War II. By 1954, the French were finally forced to retreat and negotiate a settlement. The agreement split Vietnam in two, North and South, and this division laid the groundwork for the next, more devastating conflict. With French rule officially ended, Vietnam's struggle was far from over. The North, led by Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Party, and the South, backed by Western powers, especially the US, soon found themselves locked in a power struggle. America, fearing a communist domino effect across Southeast Asia, increased its support for South Vietnam. But far from solving the crisis, the US involvement only intensified it. American soldiers were soon fighting on the ground, not just advising. This deep involvement went far beyond anything envisioned by President Kennedy. As one commentator put it, "We hold the destiny of Vietnam in our hands, and it holds ours." The war became a collision of ideologies. Communism versus capitalism. East versus West. From 1955 to 1975, Vietnam became the stage for one of the 20th century's bloodiest conflicts. US bombing campaigns, jungle warfare, and massive troop deployments caught global attention. American society itself grew divided. At home, students protested, asking, "Do the results match the cost?" The war wasn't just Vietnam's to win or lose anymore. It had become America's war too. A defining moment came in 1970 when the National Guard opened fire on protesters at Kent State University, killing 4 students. The war finally concluded in 1975 with the fall of Saigon, capital of South Vietnam. Following its capture by North Vietnamese troops, the city was renamed Ho Chi Minh City. Vietnam was once again united, now under a socialist regime. But the cost of this long fight was staggering. The country lay in ruins. The economy was in shambles. Agriculture was devastated, and infrastructure was crippled. Even more heartbreaking was the human toll. Millions had died. Entire villages were wiped out. Families were permanently separated. Vast areas of the land were destroyed by chemical agents, the effects of which continue to be felt today. The scars, both physical and emotional, ran deep. According to estimates, around 1 to 3 million Vietnamese, 300,000 Cambodians, 20,000 to 60,000 Laotians, and 58,000 American soldiers lost their lives during the war. Some 4.6 million tons of bombs were dropped on Vietnam, more than what was dropped in all of World War II. It devastated farmland, forests, and cities. Over a 20-year period, 3 million people from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia fled their homelands. According to the UNHCR, approximately 800,000 of those refugees were Vietnamese who escaped by sea. They would later come to be known as the Boat People. To summarize, Vietnam endured nearly 100 years of French colonialism, marked by exploitation and abuse. Led by Ho Chi Minh, a revolution sparked the First Indochina War against French rule, ending in 1954 with Vietnam's independence. But division between North and South led to the Vietnam War, a conflict that spanned from 1955 to 1975 and saw significant US military intervention. The war ended with the fall of Saigon and Vietnam's reunification under communism. After decades of war and hardship, Vietnam stood shattered. It was one of the world's poorest nations. From the late 1980s to 1995, GDP per capita in Vietnam ranged between just $150 and $300. To put that in perspective, in today's terms, that would make it the second poorest country on the planet, just below Afghanistan. Today, Vietnam's economy is expanding at 5.8%, while the global average sits at only 2.9%. So, what exactly is going on? Vietnam's growth isn't random. It's the result of carefully crafted trade policies, thoughtful domestic reforms, and massive investments in infrastructure and human development. Analysts at institutions like the World Bank and the Brookings Institution have identified 3 main drivers behind Vietnam's remarkable economic rise. Let's break them down to understand what's happening behind the numbers. Trade agreements and global integration. Vietnam has smartly opened itself up to international markets. It joined the ASEAN Free Trade Area back in 1995, signed a pivotal bilateral trade deal with the United States in 2000, and joined the World Trade Organization in 2007. Since then, it signed free trade agreements with powerful economies like China, Japan, South Korea, and India. In 2018, Vietnam entered the CPTPP, an agreement that includes countries like Canada, Mexico, Australia, and Singapore. Then in 2020, Vietnam finalized a trade agreement with the European Union. Altogether, these deals have laid the groundwork for Vietnam to emerge as an export powerhouse. Domestic reforms. While Vietnam opened its borders to trade, it also carried out essential reforms at home. Bureaucracy was streamlined. The government worked to reduce business barriers and make the country more attractive to investors. These reforms have already shown real results. In 2023 alone, Vietnam attracted nearly $36.6 billion in foreign direct investment. That represents a 32.1% increase from just the year before, a huge jump that puts Vietnam on a high-growth trajectory. Vietnam also made a very public show of cracking down on corruption. One high-profile case was that of Truong My Lan, a powerful businesswoman who had siphoned off around 3% of the entire nation's GDP through bribes and fraudulent activity. She was sentenced to death. Whether or not this was purely symbolic, it sent a clear message that Vietnam intends to be seen as serious about business integrity and governance. Investing in human capital and infrastructure. Vietnam is also investing heavily in education and infrastructure, especially to support its young and rapidly growing population, roughly half of whom are under 35 years old. That investment is already paying off. Historically, Vietnam's economy was centered around agriculture, exports like wet rice, coffee, and pepper. But between 2008 and 2018, agriculture's share of GDP steadily declined as the industrial sector expanded. Today, Vietnam is a major player in tech hardware manufacturing. In 2023 alone, the country exported $57.3 billion in electronic goods, ranging from phones and computers to circuit components. That puts Vietnam in 7th place globally for electronics exports, a major feat in such a short time span. And the global tech giants have taken notice. Samsung now manufactures roughly half of its smartphones in Vietnam and plans to increase its investment from $18 billion to $20 billion. Apple has already invested more than $16 billion since 2019. Creating more than 200,000 jobs across the country. Analysts project that by 2025, Vietnam will be producing 20% of all iPads and Apple Watches, 5% of all MacBooks, and 65% of all AirPods. Apple's key supplier, Foxconn, has committed another $500 million for expansion. Meanwhile, Intel has invested $1.5 billion in a new campus near Ho Chi Minh City. That site is set to become Intel's largest assembly and testing facility worldwide. So, what's behind all of this activity? It's the result of a nation that has worked hard to move from recovery to resilience, and now from resilience to rapid transformation. Vietnam is no longer just a player in the region. It's becoming a key engine in the global economy. Well, the surge in investment flowing into Vietnam isn't just some random event. It's rooted in larger global shifts. One major reason is the prolonged trade tension between the United States and China. For multinational companies, unpredictability is a business risk they'd rather avoid. They don't want to constantly navigate unstable policies or rising geopolitical tensions. As a result, they're actively seeking out more stable and reliable alternatives to China for their supply chains and production needs. And Vietnam has emerged as a leading candidate. Another big factor is the rising labor costs in China. As China continues to grow and living standards improve, the country is becoming less attractive for low-cost manufacturing. In contrast, Vietnam still offers a relatively low-cost labor force. When you add in Vietnam's advantageous location in Southeast Asia, strong infrastructure development, a business-friendly regulatory environment, generous tax incentives, and a growing list of international trade agreements, it's no surprise that companies around the world are lining up to set up shop there. Vietnam has positioned itself as a serious contender to become the world's next major manufacturing hub. And while they've made incredible strides in this space, the next big leap, innovation, is still a work in progress. It's fair to say, Vietnam isn't quite at the innovation stage just yet. True innovation takes time, talent, infrastructure, and significant investment. It's often the most difficult stage in a country's economic journey. But the Vietnamese government understands this challenge and is actively laying the foundation by prioritizing public education, research development, and access to technology. Education has become a cornerstone of national policy. And if this momentum continues, it's highly likely that Vietnam will move into a more innovation-driven economy in the future. Now let's talk about the broader impact of all this growth. Since the early 2000s, Vietnam's economy has been growing at a remarkable pace, averaging nearly 7% annually. By 2023, Vietnam's GDP had surpassed $400 billion, a major milestone for the country. This economic expansion has brought real improvements in living standards, enabling millions of Vietnamese people to join the middle class. For context, by 2013, about 30 million people, roughly 13.3% of the population, were classified as middle class. That number is projected to double by 2026, which reflects not only economic development, but also upward mobility. Vietnam is frequently compared to the Philippines, especially in terms of regional growth. While the Philippines may post stronger top-line figures in some sectors, Vietnam consistently outperforms in other key indicators. Vietnam boasts a higher GDP per capita, lower unemployment rates, and significantly less public and private debt. This means that, on average, everyday people in Vietnam are financially better off, even as the nation's total GDP doesn't top the regional charts. But let's not sugarcoat it. Despite all this positive momentum, there are still major challenges. About 20% of the population lives on less than $5.50 a day, which is the international poverty line for lower middle-income countries. Additionally, roughly 10% of the population remains at risk of falling back into poverty because of economic instability, climate shocks, or health crises. The risk of economic backsliding is real and must be addressed. Rural areas are especially vulnerable. Around 61% of Vietnam's population still lives in the countryside, and these areas often lag behind in terms of access to healthcare, education, infrastructure, and job opportunities. While urban centers like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are thriving, the gap between urban and rural living conditions remains wide. Corruption is another long-standing issue. Take, for example, the infamous Trung Nhi land scandal. Her case shocked the country and highlighted the depth of corruption within financial and governmental institutions. So yes, Vietnam has achieved a lot, And the transformation over the past few decades is nothing short of incredible. But serious work remains. Addressing inequality, expanding access to opportunity, and enforcing transparency in governance will be critical for ensuring that the benefits of economic growth reach everyone, not just the urban elite or foreign investors. In conclusion, Vietnam's journey from post-war hardship to global economic contender is one of the most compelling stories of our time. From the ruins of conflict and decades of centralized planning, Vietnam has built a dynamic, open, and hopeful society. The country's progress reflects both resilience and determination. But for this growth to be sustainable and inclusive, Vietnam must continue pushing for structural reforms, invest in innovation, and reduce systemic barriers. Only then will it truly fulfill its potential. What are your thoughts on Vietnam's rise? If you're from Vietnam or have any insights, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going.